What is up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Today's video is all about trolling motors and whether you should add one to your kayak fishing setup. I'm going to go over all of the pros and cons that I can think of so that at the end of this video, you hopefully have all the information you need to know whether this is a good idea for you or not. All right, so we are going to jump right into it with the first pro: enhanced positioning and maneuverability. If you've done any fishing out of a normal pedal kayak, you know how frustrating it can be when you're trying to get to a spot that you want to fish and that wind is just blowing you, or the water is making you go in a direction you don't want to go, and you just cast where you want to be and you're starting to float away and you have to pick that paddle up and kind of reposition yourself. That is exponentially made so much less of a big deal if you have a trolling motor on your kayak. You can keep the rod in one hand, reach behind you, and just very easily reposition so that you get right back where you need to be. This is probably one of, if not the biggest pros that I've noticed since adding a trolling motor to my fishing kayak. And I know some of you might be thinking, well, just drop an anchor, right? Just drop an anchor and fish a spot you like. And that is true, but sometimes when you're trying to find a spot that has fish, an important thing when you're fishing is finding the fish. You're not always gonna just drop anchor in a spot and just start catching fish. So if you're still fishing around trying to find the fish, you don't wanna go through the hassle of picking your anchor up, dropping it, making sure it's perfectly tied down and everything, which can be time consuming. Everything when you're out on the water, every little thing can become time consuming. This is gonna be a very important pro for you, is that you can just use that trolling motor, kind of just maneuver yourself with the wind, with the current. You're not gonna be at the whim of Mother Nature quite as much as if you just had a paddle. Once again, just being able to reach behind yourself and maneuver your position is one of the biggest pros ever. And I don't think it's something you can fully understand until you are out on the water and you have that option. Another very important pro that you should know about is that it's pretty cost effective and not that expensive to get a trolling motor and add it to your fishing kayak, especially when you compare this to the cost of how much it would be if you wanted to buy a pedal drive system for your kayak. Most of the time you'd have to buy a whole new kayak with a pedal drive if you wanted to go that route, and that would be upwards of $2,000. On the other hand, I added a trolling motor to my already existing fishing kayak, and that only cost me a total of about $500. I think that's a very reasonable expectation if you're wanting to add something like this to your setup, probably around the $500 mark. My battery was 135, my trolling motor itself was 130, and then you had to get some cables and wires and maybe some additional things to make to make it more manageable. But yeah, $500, really good price range to expect to spend, and this is so much cheaper than if you wanted to go with a pedal drive, but you're getting almost all of the benefits of a pedal drive system with a few exceptions. And really the only exception I can think of that would matter to most of you is that I think the positioning and maneuverability aspect is a little bit better in a pedal drive system because you're using your feet, and that just makes steering and controlling where you go on the water all that easier. The next pro is versatility and compatibility. Like I just said, if you want to go with a pedal drive system, that's going to cost a lot of money and you're almost certainly going to have to buy a whole new kayak. But if you have an existing fishing kayak, you can almost certainly add a trolling motor to that setup with a little ingenuity. Depending on the fishing kayak you've got, this will be easier or more difficult, but I am going to go as far as to say that it is almost certainly possible to do for any fishing kayak. And ultimately, what's really going to determine how easy your installation of your trolling motor on your kayak is the way your kayak is made. So for example, there's pretty much three areas or three ways that you're going to mount your trolling motor to your kayak. You can either mount it to the back, the front, or the side. So if you have a kayak where you're gonna have to mount your trolling motor to the side, that's probably the least favorable option because you're gonna have the least control over direction on the water, and it's a lot harder to mount in and of itself. It's gonna take a little bit more brain power and figuring it out, a little bit more DIY. If you're mounting on the front or the back, that's pretty simple. You're just gonna go online, you're gonna buy a mounting plate that fits your kayak. A lot of them are universal. You're gonna have to do a little bit of drilling unless your kayak is made to where you don't have to drill for that. And then you're gonna have that mounting plate installed on your kayak, and all you're gonna have to do is drop your trolling motor on that, tighten it up, and you're good to go. So the next pro is wind management, or just having a lot easier of a time fishing when there's windy conditions. And to kind of illustrate my point for this one, I'm gonna have to give you a real life example. And this is actually the situation that made me stop and think and decide to add a trolling motor to my setup. So basically what happened is that I decided I was gonna go saltwater fishing for the first time. And so I got to the area I wanted to go, and I picked a location that I wanted to try out on Google Earth, and I started paddling. and I quickly found out that the current was working against me and the wind was working against me. So as I was paddling, I was making minimal progress. And actually about 30 minutes into my paddle, an older gentleman, probably at least in his 60s, if not older, who I've been talking to at the boat launch, just absolutely zipped past me on his pedal drive kayak. And within 10 minutes, he was out of eyesight. I couldn't even see him. So it took me ultimately an hour and a half to get to my fishing spot that day. And when I got home, I immediately started looking into adding a trolling motor to my kayak because a pedal drive system was just out of my price range. If you're interested, you can check that video out on my channel. I'll link it in the description below. And I actually went fishing in similar conditions in a similar location yesterday. And the trolling motor that I have on my kayak was an absolute lifesaver. I don't think I would have even been able to fish that day if I hadn't had a trolling motor on my kayak. By the way, guys, if you're interested, I do have a video linked below of me just out on the water fishing in my kayak with the trolling motor, just a day on the water demo so that you can know what a typical day on the water looks like when you add a trolling motor to your kayak. So if that's interesting to you, if you just want to see what a typical day on the water looks like, go ahead and click the link below. I'll have that in the description. And that leads me to my last pro that I'm going to talk about today, which is speed and efficiency. This is the simplest one that there is, guys. You're faster. You're moving faster. I think my top speed with my trolling motor is somewhere around 4 to 5 miles per hour, and I'm not exerting any energy while I'm doing this. So I can get to spots faster, and I'm not tired and sweating when I get there. But more importantly, I can get to spots before other people get there. So if you're fishing a pressure body of water where there's a lot of competition, you're gonna be the first one there when you're looking at all the other people on pedal drive kayaks or paddle kayaks, because that trolling motor is gonna outpace, I would bet, both of them. This will also come in handy when you want to explore new areas, you know? Maybe you've been on Google Maps and you've been eyeballing a spot across the lake you're on for months now, and you're like, that looks like the fishiest spot, but it's just too far, I can't paddle and there's no launches over there. Now that is an option to you, right? With that trolling motor, that's something you could probably do and still get there in a reasonable amount of time and have plenty of time to get back. So that is another game changer with the trolling motor that I don't think a lot of people consider. You are gonna maximize your time on the water. When you are on the water, every little inconvenience just takes up so much time. If you snag your line, if you get pushed somewhere where you don't want to be and you have to paddle back to your location where you were fishing, if you have to drop your anchor, if you're, have a fish on the line and the fish pulls you out in the middle of the, waterway and you got to worry about boats coming along. These are all inconveniences that are really going to make your time on the water less enjoyable. So that trolling motor is going to help you to kind of overcome a lot of those. And that is it for the pros, guys. So now we're gonna move into some of the cons. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. So if this is at all helpful for you, please like and subscribe and leave a comment down below if you've got any questions at all. The goal of this channel is to be as helpful as possible to new or beginner bass fishermen. All right, guys, so the first con I've got is the weight of the battery that is required to run your trolling motor. So the battery that I've got is pretty much as small as you could go while still running your trolling motor for a good bit of time. So I've got a 12 volt, 50 amp hour battery, and that sucker still weighs about 35 pounds. This is heavy. This is a heavy thing to have on your kayak. You have to take into account where it's going to be. If it's going to be on the back, is it going to weigh you down too much? Is it going to have to go on the front? So this is a con, and this is also going to come up in some other cons later. The next con that I'm going to touch on today is installation struggles. Depending on your kayak and how handy you are with like DIY type stuff, this could be a really big con for you. Now, me personally, I'm not good with that kind of stuff, but I got very lucky. I have a NuCanoe Flint fishing kayak, and this kayak is, in my opinion, the best beginner kayak that you can go with because it is pre-rigged to take a trolling motor. You don't have to do anything but buy the mounting plate, add it to the back, and you're good to go. But most people are probably not going to be this lucky. You're going to have to do some research. You're going to have to do some digging on YouTube to see if people have your kayak and see how they've gone about adding a trolling motor. There's probably going to be a little bit of drilling involved and a little bit of wiring, depending on where you want your battery to sit in position to your trolling motor, because you probably don't want them both sitting on the back unless you have a really sturdy kayak. So this next con is admittedly a small one, but it still is something that you have to consider, and that is that in most states, if you add a trolling motor to your kayak, you're going to have to register that kayak before you can legally operate it on the water. Registering your kayak is not that expensive. I think it was like 35 bucks when I did it, and you just have to provide a bill of sale and like proof that you own it. So it's not that complicated, but it is a little bit of a hurdle that you will have to figure out when you go about doing this. So this next con is probably the biggest con in my opinion, and it affects me the most personally. And that is that you are gonna spend a lot more time setting up and loading your kayak than you did before, right? The more gear you've got, the more time it's gonna take just to get everything set up. And when you add a trolling motor and a battery to that equation, you're just complicating things even more. So when you get to the boat launch, you're gonna have to figure out where to set your kayak. You're gonna have to put all your gear on it. You're gonna have to put the trolling motor on it, which can be really hard because sometimes you have to push it into the water and then lower the trolling motor because you can't do that when you're on land, and you can't do it when you're on the water in the kayak because it can be kind of challenging to stand up in the kayak and go to the back and lower it. So it's a lot more complicated to do. So me personally, I actually get to the boat launch about 30 to 45 minutes earlier now that I've got a trolling motor on my kayak, just to ensure that I have enough time to get out on the water at daylight. And this could be really, really a pain, especially if you don't like getting up early. All right guys, and that is it. That is all of the pros and cons that I've noticed since adding a trolling motor to my setup. Let me know if you have any questions or if you think I missed any. Overall, I think the pros far outweigh the cons in my opinion, but if you disagree, let me know below. If this video was helpful to you or if you enjoyed it, go ahead and subscribe. I've got tons of fishing content with me in the kayak with the trolling motor coming out very soon. So if that's something you're interested in, stay tuned. I also plan on doing a ton more tutorial videos like this, going over lure selection, gear reviews, just beginner tips and tricks, how to find fish. So if that's something interesting to you as well, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, and I will catch all of you next time.